r/AskReddit. Those who have been to a ruined wedding, what happened? I played a wedding where as we started playing the set, everyone ran outside and nobody was to be seen for the rest of the night. I originally assumed it was because nobody liked us, but the bride came in afterwards and said there was a huge fight involving multiple members of both families, and everyone basically went home upset, injured or in a police van. We couldn't stop playing since we were paid and it was our job, and the only person watching was the uncle dancing on his own asking for requests we didn't know. The uncle dancing by himself all night sounds like something that would happen at a Sims wedding. I was not born yet, but my parents rented the observation deck on the Hancock Building in Boston for their reception. Tallest building in the city, beautiful view. My dad pored over historic weather charts to figure out what day was statistically most likely to be nice out. Day of the wedding comes and of course, thick fog unlike anything they'd ever seen before. Couldn't see a thing out the windows of the room they had picked specifically for the view. Worked out well though, they were happily married for nearly 30 years before cancer took my dad's life a few years ago. There's one other funny anecdote from that wedding. The wedding was held in King's Chapel, which is an incredibly historic church here in downtown Boston that's somewhat of a major tourist attraction. To close that on a weekend afternoon for a wedding, it turns out, was not very expensive. The tourists waiting outside to see the church didn't know that, though, and someone started the rumor that my parents were incredibly wealthy, maybe even Kennedys. As a result, there were tons of people taking photos of them when they left the ceremony. Not sure if any of them ever figured out that my parents were most certainly not rich or famous. When I was 6 or 7 I went to a cousin's wedding. Everything was fabulous for little me, so much sugar everywhere, basically heaven. The reception was in a big community center that was reserved for the occasion. Went to the girls' bathroom, passing by the men's room to see my uncle on the floor. Went back to the main room to tell my dad my uncle was looking weird. Well, uncle had a stroke and had died. The bride spent the rest of the afternoon crying, and everyone except close family left. Bright side is the marriage is still going strong 20 years later, despite what happened that day. That sounds super traumatic for everyone involved. Was the uncle the bride's father? My dad and stepmom's wedding was a show. For context, her family was terrible on both sides. Father, neglectful mother, and step-parents who didn't care about her much. And she basically ran to my father to get away from it all when she was 15. Bigger problem was, my dad was 26, also bad, and just a real stuffing show of a person. On my father's side of things, he hated his mother and blamed everything wrong in his life on her, as he did to most women in his family, later doing it to my stepmom. So the wedding was doomed to be terrible. It started when my stepmom was walking down the aisle. She had reconnected with her father in the last year and had recently been in a fight with her stepfather, so it was just her dad walking her. There was a branch in the way, outdoor wedding, but he pulled it out of the way for her. As she thanks him, he lets go and flings it back into her face and literally collapses laughing. She awkwardly chuckles, no doubt knowing he is going to get mad at her if she shows she's upset, and the day continues but she's visibly upset. After the toast, some people didn't drink the champagne that had been set out. The one thing she had asked of her mom was that she not drink. She was even given sparkling juice rather than champagne. So while stepmom is changing into her reception dress, her mom goes table to table pounding down all of the alcohol she can get her hands on. A cousin of mine who doesn't know what's happening starts chanting chug, 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 and stepmom walks back to her mom downing the last one and denying everything. Cousin slips out the tent once he realizes what's going on and leaves the two alone to argue. Stepmom comes out crying a few minutes later, goes back to her car, and doesn't come back for a good 20 minutes. While all of that is happening, Grandma pulls up and starts cursing out my dad for a ton of stuff, including marrying a kid. Stepmom was 25 at this point, who she hates, not letting her invite a friend to the wedding, and him owing her a bunch of money. Dad tells her to stuff off and she leaves. Then my dad got mad at my stepmom for being gone so long, accused her of either being a baby for crying or of lying and cheating on him. So she sat down on the fringes and tried to not cry and also remain visible to my dad for the next several hours. They may have been dating for 10 years, but the marriage only lasted 6 months. Leading up to my friend's wedding, his father had been battling cancer after a terminal diagnosis. And it was touch and go whether he would be well enough to attend the wedding. In the end he was too unwell to attend despite wishing that he could. Just as we got to the wedding reception, my friend was informed that his father had just passed away. It was devastating. My wife's grandfather slipped downstairs 2 days before our wedding. We got told it was a very bruised ankle, but he couldn't make it. That developed the day after into ongoing hospitalization for observation. We didn't question it. He was 81. We went on honeymoon the day after that. On day 4 of the honeymoon he passed away. Despite asking to be updated, we didn't get told until our return. Turns out the fall down the stairs was real, so was the bruised ankle. It's just that my mother-in-law, it was her dad, deliberately didn't mention the significant internal injuries. Gordon left a good legacy. The wooden chair leg on Henry VIII statue above the gate to Trinity College in Cambridge, he was one of the students that made it happen. The story in the student newspaper Varsity that a cleaner put it there isn't true. I've catered many weddings, and there have been some memorable ones. Fights between guests, wedding cakes falling over, red wine spilled on wedding dresses. The lot. The one I'll never forget, an all-day do, small ceremony, a few close friends and family, and a big reception filled with a huge buffet, every type of food you could imagine, and a free bar. All in the same venue. They had booked and paid for 250 evening guests. But 30 guests turned up, at most. My heart broke for this couple. A massive, beautiful converted barn, loads of food and drinks, great music, but no guests. At about 10 p.m., the venue was licensed until 11 p.m. The buffet food had barely been touched. The few who were there ate, but it hardly made a dent as it was planned for so many more people. I asked the mother of the bride if she wanted me to cover and refrigerate the untouched food so the new couple could take it home, and her response of "Oh no, there are still a lot of people coming" was the most awkward I've ever felt in my life. No more guests showed. There was a flash of car headlights in the distance about 10:30 p.m. and the bride beamed when she thought it was latecomers arriving. But no, it was just taxis arriving to pick up the few who were there. It's the only event I have ever done where we didn't have to kick people out of the venue. At 11 p.m., the place was empty. In a nutshell, bride's parents paid for the day, and the happy couple had zero control over their guest list. Her parents invited all their friends to the evening function, but in reality, it was just associates they wanted to flex on, resulting in no one giving a stuff about an invite to a wedding where they didn't know the bride or groom. It was basically just a networking event for the bride's parents. For those asking, I believe the guests did RSVP. But instead of a handful of guests thinking stuff it, we don't know them, they won't notice we're not there, it was the majority of them. I work at a golf course with a lot of history behind it. We do wedding venues inside a clubhouse, and the actual ceremony is held outside by the historic water fountain and large pond. First problem was the weather. I live in the high desert and it was very warm. A solid 90 degrees that day, and it was also pretty windy. So everyone's outside, no umbrellas, no as-ups. The next problem, and probably the worst, was the golf cart incident. The bride and groom wanted to ride into the sunset on one of our golf carts. Drive around a little bit on the golf course. To be fair, it is beautiful on the course during sunset. However, the cart had somehow gotten a nail in the tire. Tire went flat, battery on the cart went crazy, and the cart ended up freaking out. It came to a complete stop from 15 miles per hour to 0. The wheels and mechanisms locked up, almost seizing. Both the bride and groom, fairly overweight mind you, both fell out and rolled over a few times. They were totally okay, just a few bruises and perhaps a bruised ego or two. So retrieving that cart was fun. And last but not least, the power inside the clubhouse went out due to the high winds. There was no after-party available. Only the cake was cut, hardly any food was given out. Yeah, not a great day to cover for someone on your day off. I used to do catering work, and this one time my boss sent me to a remote location in the woods on a beautiful river. I found out while we were loading the truck that the boss wouldn't be going and that I was essentially in charge. My boss promised that everything was taken care of, set up, etc. So, you can imagine my surprise when I arrived to this remote location and literally, nothing was set up. We were only about an hour early, so I frantically started trying to get the tent in order. We needed extension cords to run the coffee and tea, there were none. We needed tables to set up the food, there were none. I somehow whipped up impromptu everything for the missing things, and just as the bride and groom are arriving, we blow the fuse for our only power source and the place is plunged into darkness. We reset the breaker, I move some stuff around. Blow the fuse again. This delicate dance went on for the entire evening. Through speeches, first dance, the works. I think the worst part of the entire experience was when we went to rinse our dishes before boxing them up and found out that when we blew the fuses the water pump for the place stopped working and needed to be primed again. At that point I said, forget about it, we'll take them back dirty, and the crew and I spent several more hours after the long ride home doing them. That was the day I worked a 15-hour shift without a break, and still ruined the wedding. Needless to say, I quit that job. I was best man at my sister-in-law's wedding, stepped in for the brother of the groom, that's another story entirely. For a whole year of planning all the bride, still, wanted was a dove release while they said handwritten vows to each other. Very small, non-denominational, most of the family are atheists anyway. Wedding day arrives, early summer, and something is off with the bird handlers. They show up a bit late and are sourcing help from the wedding party to get everything in line. When the time comes to say their vows, I help the handler carry the chest with the doves in it over to what is to be the altar where the bride and groom are standing. Vows are just about wrapping up and the handler gives me the signal to open the chest. I open it and see 20-30 dead doves in the crate. I immediately close it to try and limit who knows what happened. Too late. The look of horror on her face was all that was needed. We spent the next few hours trying to cheer everyone up, but by the end of the reception the entire wedding party had organized and filed animal cruelty complaints on the handler. It was all anyone could focus on. On the bright side, this is gonna save you a lot of money on food at the reception.